The morning was silent. Mist still hung like a soft blanket over the monastery gardens. Birds were awake, but even they spoke in whispers. The young monk had been waiting for this day. He walked with fast steps, fists clenched, heart pounding. He had trained for years, meditated for hours, but today, he was ready for real knowledge. Today, he would finally meet the Zen Master. He stepped into the Master's small hut and bowed deeply. "Master," he said, "I've studied every scroll, practiced every ritual, memorized every sutra. I want to learn Zen, truly learn. Please teach me." The Master looked at him, not with judgment, but with something else. Stillness. He said nothing. Instead, he gestured for the monk to sit. Then the Master picked up a teapot, placed an old cracked cup on the table, and began to pour. The young monk watched. The cup filled, and then the tea spilled over, onto the table, onto the monk's robe. Still, the Master kept pouring. The monk couldn't take it anymore. "Stop! The cup is full. Can't you see? Nothing more can go in." The Master finally looked at him and spoke his first words. "Exactly. You are like this cup, so full of your own thoughts, ideas, and pride, that nothing new can enter. If you truly wish to learn, first empty your cup." And just like that, the lesson was complete. But the story doesn't end here. We hear this story and we nod. Yes, empty the cup, let go, be humble. But let me ask you something. When was the last time you actually emptied your cup? When was the last time you truly listened, without interrupting, without judging, without already having your answer ready in your head? You read a book, but do you really read it? Or do you just try to confirm what you already believe? You ask for advice, but do you really listen? Or are you just waiting for the part that agrees with your ego? Most of us don't want wisdom. We want confirmation. We don't want change. We want comfort. And that's why we stay stuck in the same patterns, same failures, same thoughts, year after year. The truth is harsh. You can't fill a mind that's already full. You can't grow in silence if you're always busy shouting in your head. You say you want transformation, but are you willing to let go of the you who's been holding the wheel? Because here's the reality no one tells you. Real growth doesn't begin by adding something. It begins by removing pride, removing assumptions, removing the false belief that I already know. The Zen Master never taught with books. He taught by experience. Because Zen is not something you learn, it's something you realize. And that realization begins only when the noise stops. When you sit still, when you breathe, when you finally say, "I don't know, but I'm ready to learn." That moment, that's your true beginning. So if you're watching this, maybe this is your sign to pause, to reflect, and ask yourself one question. What am I so full of that I can't receive what I truly need? Maybe it's ego. Maybe it's pain. Maybe it's your need to be right. Whatever it is, let it go. Empty your cup. Because only then can you fill it with something real. And maybe, just maybe, that's where your real journey begins. If this story touched something inside you, like this video, but only if it really meant something, share in the comments. What's the one thing you need to let go of to truly grow? And if you want more stories like this, stories that don't just motivate, but transform, then subscribe. This channel isn't for dopamine. It's for discipline. It's for the inner war and those brave enough to fight it. The sound of one hand clapping. It was a quiet afternoon when the young monk finally gathered the courage to ask a question that had haunted him for months. The Master was seated under a giant Bodhi tree, eyes half closed, as if listening to something the world had forgotten how to hear. The monk bowed, then spoke hesitantly. "Master, I've meditated, I've chanted, I've fasted. Yet stillness escapes me. I cannot silence the noise inside." The Master opened his eyes, looked at him, and simply said, "Go. Listen to the sound of one hand clapping." The monk froze. He didn't understand. How can one hand clap? isn't clapping the sound of two hands. He waited for more. But the master had already closed his eyes again, slipping back into that impossible silence. Confused, the monk left. But the words haunted him like a riddle etched into his spine. What does it mean? Every day, he would sit by the pond, closing his eyes, raising one hand, waving it in the air, hoping to hear something, anything. But all he heard was wind, the rustle of leaves, and the restless beating of his own thoughts. Days passed, then weeks. Frustration began to grow. He began to question not just the cone, but the master, the teachings, even his own decision to walk this path. What if Zen was just beautiful nonsense? What if there was no real peace? One night, unable to sleep, he sat by the river and cried, not because he was weak, but because he was tired. Tired of seeking, tired of pretending, tired of feeling like he was always falling short of some invisible standard. And in that moment of raw surrender, not performance, not practice, but pure, painful honesty, something shifted. He stopped searching for the sound. He stopped trying to understand with his mind. He just sat, breath, felt the cool air on his face, heard the river flow, the distant howl of a wild dog, his own heartbeat. He wasn't trying to be present. He simply was. And for the first time, silence wasn't empty. It was full of meaning, full of answers that didn't need words, full of something deeper than sound, awareness. In that silence, he understood. The sound of one hand clapping is not a trick question. It's a mirror. It's not about hearing something outside. It's about recognizing that the noise inside you is not you. The cone isn't meant to be solved. It's meant to break you, to break your addiction to logic, to force your mind to exhaust itself until only awareness remains. Because that's where Zen begins. You see, most people are like that monk in the beginning, chasing stillness like a possession, reading books, repeating rituals, hoping that one more chant, one more hack, one more quote will finally bring peace. But peace doesn't come from addition. It comes from subtraction, from dropping the idea that you need to achieve silence. You don't. Silence is already there, beneath the noise, beneath the thinking, beneath the ego. It's not something you find. It's something you return to. But the problem is, you're too busy trying to get there. Too busy analyzing, decoding, intellectualizing everything. Even your healing, even your pain. You want your suffering to make sense. You want your wounds to have a poetic reason. But maybe they don't. Maybe some things just are. And maybe your job is not to fix them, but to face them. What if you stopped trying to clap with one hand and just listen? Listen to your restlessness, your frustration, your pain. What would happen if instead of silencing the mind, you observed it without judgment, without resistance? You see, Zen is not about being calm all the time. It's about seeing clearly, even when you're not. So maybe the master wasn't pointing the monk to a sound. Maybe he was pointing him back to himself. And maybe, just maybe, you needed this story today. Not as a riddle, not as a teaching, but as a reminder that sometimes when the world grows too loud and nothing makes sense, and your search feels hopeless, the answer is not to try harder. It's to sit still and listen. Because the sound of one hand clapping is not a sound. It's the moment you realize you were never broken, only distracted. If this story made you pause, even for a second, like this video, not out of habit, but because it meant something, comment below. What are you trying too hard to understand? Subscribe if you're ready to go beyond motivation into meaning. Beyond noise, into silence. This isn't a channel for those who seek shortcuts. This is for those who want to sit through the storm until they realize they are the sky. The muddy road, the rain had not stopped for hours. Thick clouds hung low, and the ground was soaked in a deep, sticky silence. Two monks, one old, one young, walked down a country road, their robes damp and heavy. Every step was careful. The mud clung to their sandals like memories that refused to let go. As they turned a corner, they saw her. A woman stood at the edge of a small stream. Her silk kimono was brilliant, even under the gray sky. Her eyes, though proud, held discomfort. The stream before her had overflowed from the rain, and the path was now a muddy mess. She looked down at her clean garments, then at the muddy water, unsure. The younger monk quickly turned his gaze away. Monks were not to engage with women, especially not one dressed like this. But without a word, the older monk stepped forward. He walked through the mud, lifted the woman gently, and carried her across. He set her down carefully on the other side. She gave a silent nod, not of gratitude but of entitlement, and continued on her way. The younger monk was stunned. He said nothing, but his mind was screaming. How could the master do this? Didn't he just break a rule? Aren't monks supposed to remain untouched by desire, by distraction, by worldly interaction? They walked in silence. An hour passed, then two. And finally, the younger monk couldn't hold it in any longer. Master, he said sharply, we took vows to avoid contact with women, especially those dressed so finely. Yet you lifted her in your arms. The old monk looked at him, almost surprised. I set her down hours ago, he said softly. Why are you still carrying her? And in that one sentence, the lesson landed like a stone in the chest. We do this all the time, don't we? We hold on to things long after they passed. Someone said something hurtful 2 years ago, and it still echoes in your head every night. Someone broke your trust, and even though they're gone, you still carry the bitterness in your heart. You lost something, an opportunity, a relationship, a version of yourself, and you keep dragging its ghost through every new day like emotional luggage with no destination. We think we've moved on. We smile, we work, we say we're fine. But deep down, we're still standing in that muddy stream, refusing to cross. You see, the past doesn't stay alive on its own. We feed it. Every time we replay the story, every time we nurture the grudge, every time we say, they did this to me. We keep it breathing. We keep carrying it. But Zen teaches something different. Zen says, you don't get peace by erasing the past. You get peace by releasing it. The old monk wasn't blind. He saw the rules. He understood the vows. But in that moment, he also saw the truth, that compassion is more important than perfection. That letting go in the present is more powerful than being chained by ideas of purity. And most of all, that what we carry in the mind is far heavier than what we carry in our hands. So, what are you still carrying? Whose face still shows up in your head when you're alone? What story are you still telling yourself about what went wrong or who wronged you? And more importantly, how much longer will you keep walking with that weight on your back? Because the truth is, holding on doesn't protect you. It poisons you. It turns your memories into anchors. And it robs you of the present, the only place where life actually happens. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing freedom over resentment. It means saying, yes, that happened, but it doesn't own me anymore. It means learning to walk forward without dragging the mud of yesterday on your feet. And sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is put something down. If this story stirred something inside you, like the video, not to support me, but to remind yourself you are ready to release. Comment below, what burden are you ready to put down today? And if you're walking this path of inner silence, emotional discipline, and self-awareness, then subscribe. This isn't a channel for noise. It's for those who are tired of carrying things that no longer serve them. The moon cannot be stolen. It was late, the kind of night where silence has weight, the kind of night where even thoughts move slowly. The Zen Master sat alone in his small wooden hut, his floor bare, his possessions few. A candle flickered near the window, its light dancing across the thin paper walls. Outside, the crickets sang their endless song, a reminder that even in stillness, life moves. Suddenly, the door creaked open. A thief entered, face half covered, eyes darting. He expected fear, resistance, maybe even a fight. But instead, the master simply looked up, calm as the windless night. No panic, no anger, just presence. The thief looked around. Nothing. No gold, no ornaments. Just a mat, a bowl, and a folded robe. The master spoke gently. "You've come a long way to visit me. You shouldn't return empty-handed. Take my clothes." The thief paused, confused, but the master stood up, removed his robe, and handed it to him without hesitation. Embarrassed, the thief grabbed the robe and ran off into the night. The master watched him vanish into the darkness, then sat back down on the floor, naked, cold, yet at peace. He looked up through the open window. The moon was full, bright, resting above the hills like a witness to all things. And the master whispered to himself, "Poor fellow, I wish I could have given him the moon." We hear this story, and for a moment, we admire the master's detachment. But then the real question appears, could you do that? If someone tried to take what's yours, your clothes, your home, your job, your status, could you let it go without anger, without fear? Most people can't, because most people are owned by what they think they own. You believe your peace depends on what's in your hands, your car, your phone, your bank balance, your titles, your relationships, your image. But the master knew a truth that most of us spend our whole lives running from. Anything that can be taken from you was never truly yours. You see, peace isn't about having nothing. Peace is about having nothing to lose. And that's a very different kind of strength. It's not passive. It's not weak. It's not giving up. It's the power that comes when your identity is no longer tied to what you possess, but to what you are. Because when you let go of everything, something beautiful remains, something untouchable. You realize that even if they steal your clothes, they can't steal your calm. Even if they destroy your reputation, they can't touch your silence. Even if you lose everything, you still have the moon. The thief thought he stole something, but the master gave it freely. And in doing so, he kept everything. We live in a world that tells us to collect. Collect money, followers, likes, labels, power. But the more we collect, the more we fear losing. And fear is a thief too. It steals your joy in silence. It makes you live cautiously, defensively, always gripping tight. But Zen says, open your hand, loosen the grip. Because when your peace depends on something outside of you, you're always just one loss away from losing yourself. So, what are you clinging to? What are you terrified to lose? And what if, just for a moment, you imagine your life without it? Would you still be you? Would you still be whole? If the answer shakes you, then maybe that's the very attachment you need to let go. If this story whispered something deep into your bones, like the video, not for the algorithm, but as a quiet yes to yourself, comment below. What's your robe? What do you fear losing that might be owning you? And if you're ready to live like the master, not in poverty of things, but in the richness of inner freedom, then subscribe. This channel isn't for those chasing more. It's for those searching for less and finding everything in it. Learning to die before you die, the young monk had been struggling. Not with hunger, not with sleep, not even with the long hours of meditation. He could sit still for hours, recite sutras, chop wood, carry water. Outwardly, he looked like a perfect disciple, but inside, there was a storm, quiet, cold, and constant. He felt it every time the master praised another monk, every time someone else was chosen to assist in the temple rituals, every time his opinion was ignored or his efforts unseen. He wouldn't say it out loud. Monks weren't supposed to care about recognition, but the truth stayed. Somewhere deep inside, he wanted to be important. He wanted to be the best student. He wanted to be someone. One evening, unable to bear it anymore, he approached the master. "Master," he said, "I've given up my possessions, my desires, my comforts. I left my home, my name, my past. But still, I feel trapped. I feel envy. Ego. I feel small and restless. Why can't I be free? The master listened quietly, then said, Come to the forest with me tomorrow. Bring your sharpest spade. The next morning, the two of them walked deep into the woods. When they reached a small clearing, the master pointed to the ground. Dig, he said. The monk began to dig. The earth was soft, the sun was high, and his hands soon blistered. After an hour, the master stopped him. Now, he said, lie down inside. The monk hesitated, but he obeyed. The master took a handful of soil and without ceremony dropped it on the monk's chest. What are you doing? The monk asked, alarmed. Die, the master said softly. Die before you die. The monk lay still, the weight of the words and the soil pressing into his ribs. And in that strange moment, lying in the earth, half buried, something broke. Not physically, something inside. All his expectations, his pride, his ambition, the image he was carrying of himself, the good monk, the disciplined student, the spiritual achiever, it began to dissolve. He realized he had not truly given up his self. He had only changed the costume, from a worldly man to a spiritual one. But the clinging was the same. He hadn't surrendered. He had only disguised his ego. And for the first time, he saw it clearly. You see, most people live their whole lives trying to build something, a name, a brand, a persona. We polish ourselves. We chase success. Or in the spiritual world, we chase enlightenment. But whether it's gold or peace, fame or stillness, the chasing comes from the same place, a fear of disappearing. The ego doesn't care what you seek as long as it keeps you seeking. But Zen teaches something radical, something most people aren't ready for. You must die before you die, not physically, but psychologically. The you that clings, that compares, that reacts, that builds identity from thoughts and approval and fear. That you must dissolve, not because it's evil, but because it's not real. And until that death happens, that surrender, you'll keep walking in circles, changing roles, changing clothes, changing goals, but never touching the ground of who you really are. Because peace isn't found by upgrading your identity. It's found by releasing it. When the monk lay in that grave, even for a moment, he tasted something most of us never do, emptiness without fear. He faced his inner death and survived. Lighter, clearer, finally free. So the question is, can you die before you die? Can you let go of the identity you protect so fiercely? The version of you that always wants to be liked, admired, validated? Can you sit with the fear of being nothing and find that in nothingness there is no lack? Because real peace isn't the presence of everything, it's the absence of need. If this story touched a silent place inside you, like the video, not to support numbers, but to honor what you just felt, comment below, what part of you are you ready to let go of, even bury? And if you're walking this rare path, not of becoming more, but becoming real, then subscribe. This channel isn't for motivation addicts. It's for those ready to sit in the fire and let the false self burn. The bamboo and the oak, it was the season of storms. The wind had been howling through the mountains for days, not as a whisper, but as a force that bent trees, lifted roofs, and carried silence away with it. In the heart of a remote Zen monastery, the master asked his young disciple to come with him to the garden. The boy followed, uncertain. The sky above them was heavy, gray like wet stone, and the air smelled of soil and surrender. They stood in the middle of the forest clearing, surrounded by tall oaks and slender bamboo. The wind roared again, and the trees swayed violently. Some oak branches cracked and snapped. A few had already fallen, proud giants brought low by their own strength. But the bamboo, it bent. It leaned so far it almost kissed the earth. Yet it never broke. When the wind passed, the bamboo stood upright again, calm, silent, as if nothing had happened. The master turned to the student and said, "In life, learn from the bamboo, not the oak." At first, The monk didn't understand. Oaks were strong, mighty, solid. The bamboo seemed too fragile, too soft. But over time, as more storms came and went, he saw it clearly. It wasn't the oak that survived. It was the bamboo. Not because it was stronger, but because it knew how to bend. Most people live like oaks. We are taught from childhood to stand firm, fight back, never fold, never fall. We associate strength with rigidity, with clenching our fists, raising our voice, building walls, being unshakable. But the truth is, what cannot bend breaks. And what we call weakness might actually be wisdom in disguise. The bamboo doesn't resist the storm. It moves with it. It bows. Not out of defeat, but out of deep understanding that not every battle is won by force. Some are survived by surrender. And that surrender is not collapse. It's clarity. So ask yourself, how do you react when life hits hard? Do you stiffen up, tighten your chest, try to control every outcome, fight everything that doesn't go your way? Or can you breathe, bend, allow the moment to pass through you without letting it shatter you? You see, pain is not always a punishment. Sometimes it's a purifier. It doesn't come to destroy you. It comes to show you where you still too rigid, where you're still holding on too tightly. The oak stands tall until it cracks. But the bamboo leans into the pressure and rises again untouched. Real resilience isn't loud. It's quiet. It doesn't show up as noise or pride. It shows up as patience, as softness, as the ability to say, this moment is painful, but I don't need to collapse inside it. It's the art of staying rooted, even when everything above ground is bending. So many of us try to resist life. We argue with what is. We demand control. And when things fall apart, we think we failed. But maybe falling apart was the first real step to learning how to stay whole. The bamboo doesn't have thick bark. It doesn't have deep branches. It's hollow inside, and maybe that's the secret. Emptiness creates space for flexibility. When you stop filling yourself with ego, plans, expectations, and pride, you become spacious. You become like bamboo, and then no storm can uproot you. If this story made you pause, if it softened something inside you, like the video, that's your inner bamboo rising. Comment below, what storm are you facing right now, and how can you face it with more softness? If you want stories that don't scream motivation, but speak to your soul, subscribe. This isn't a channel for warriors who only know how to fight. It's for those who are learning how to flow, how to bend, how to survive, and still stay whole. No water, no moon. It was late evening in the monastery, the hour where the bell had already been rung for rest, and most monks had retired to their rooms. But one young nun was still searching. Her room was small, no larger than a single mat. Her eyes scanned the dim space again and again. Her face showed quiet panic. She was looking for her most precious belonging, an old, wooden begging bowl given to her by her mother before she had entered monastic life. It had been passed down for generations, carved with care, darkened by time. She had carried it with her through cold winters and harsh summers. It wasn't just a bowl. It was her last thread of attachment. She looked under the mat, behind the door. She walked back to the meditation hall, retracing her steps. No sign. Her breath became shallow, her heart restless. A storm of thoughts churned in her, grief, guilt, confusion. Finally, unable to bear the anxiety, she went to the old Zen Master, who sat quietly under the moonlight, sweeping the stone path with a warm broom. "Master," she whispered, "I've lost my bowl. The one my mother gave me. I've searched everywhere. I can't find it." The master didn't look up. He simply said, "Then it is gone." "But it was the only thing I had," she said, tears now forming in her eyes. "The last thing from before I came here." The master stopped sweeping. He turned to her slowly and said just 6 words, soft, but as sharp as lightning. "No water, no moon, no bowl." At first, she didn't understand. The words made no sense. She stared at him in silence. But then something began to shift. In that moment of loss, in the silence after the seeking, something inside her cracked open. The bowl was gone. The memory of it, fading. The meaning she had attached to it, breaking. The part of her that needed it to feel complete, dissolving. And in that emptiness, the emptiness she had always feared, there was peace. Not because she had found what she was looking for, but because she stopped needing to find anything. You see, most of us live like that young nun. We're always seeking, always holding on to something, a person, a memory, a belief, an identity. We think peace will come when we find the right object, the right answer, the perfect feeling. But Zen whispers a deeper truth. There is no water. There is no moon. There is no bowl. There is only this moment, this breath, this awareness. Before the mind names it, claims it, clings to it. Even the moon we see reflected on the water isn't real. Try to touch it, it vanishes. Try to hold it, it slips through your fingers. And yet, isn't it beautiful? Isn't it enough? The master's words were not cruel. They were a mirror. He wasn't just pointing to the lost bowl. He was pointing to her lost self, the part of her that thought it needed something outside to feel whole. The part of her that still believed that spiritual peace was about getting something, rather than releasing everything. That night, the nun did not cry. She sat in her room, and for the first time, truly understood what it meant to let go, not just of an object, but of the identity that clung to the object, the seeker, the spiritual self, the one who was always trying to arrive. There was no arrival, only awareness. Only the quiet presence of what is once the illusions are gone, and in that silent space, there was no lack. So the question is not, what are you still searching for? The real question is, who is the one searching? Because when you see clearly that the seeker itself is a thought, a shadow, an echo, then there is nothing left to hold. And that is not emptiness. That is freedom. If this final story settled your heart in stillness, like the video, sometimes that is your soul's way of bowing. Comment below. What are you finally ready to release? Not because it's bad, but because it's no longer you. If you've walked through these 7 stories with an open heart, then subscribe. This is not a channel for collecting wisdom. It's for those ready to empty the bowl and find the moon inside themselves. The unseen weight. It was a cold morning in the mountains. The fog had settled low across the narrow forest paths, blurring the line between the sky and the trees. A young monk named Cato was walking silently beside the Zen Master. They carried nothing in their hands, yet something about Cato's face showed strain, like he had been carrying something heavy for miles. The Master noticed, but he didn't speak. They continued walking. Hours passed. Birds flew across the canopy, and distant temple bells echoed faintly through the valley. Still, Cato walked with a furrowed brow and clenched fists. Finally, the master stopped near a small river. "Sit," he said. Cato sat down with a sigh, as if relieved not just from the walking, but from something deeper. "Master," he said slowly, "why is it that even when I'm not holding anything, I feel so tired?" The master looked into his eyes, calm and clear, and replied, "Because you are carrying what the eyes cannot see." The monk looked puzzled. The master picked up a small stone from the river and placed it in Cato's hand. "Hold this," he said. Cato held it without effort. "Not heavy," he whispered. The master nodded. "Now imagine holding it for 10 minutes. An hour, a whole day. Not because of its weight, but because you never let go." The master leaned closer. "This is what your guilt is like. This is what your anger, your regrets, your failures, this is what they do to you. They're just thoughts, small events. But when you carry them too long, they become your burden." Cato's breath slowed as he looked at the stone. "But how do I let go of what I can't see?" he asked. The master answered gently. "You begin by seeing it. You don't have to throw it away. Just place it down. On a page, in a prayer, in silence. The letting go doesn't begin in your hand. It begins in your heart. Cato suddenly felt a tightness in his chest loosen, as if the truth had untied a knot that had been there for years. He looked at the stone again and slowly placed it beside him on the ground. The moment was small, quiet, but in that silence, Cato felt something inside him shift. He realized he had been carrying old wounds, words spoken years ago, mistakes that kept playing in his mind like broken records. He had never forgiven himself. He had never allowed himself to rest. But now, sitting by the river, he could feel the difference between holding and releasing, between suppressing and surrendering, between fighting and accepting. He closed his eyes, not to escape but to see more clearly. When they rose to walk again, Cato walked differently. The path was still uphill. The wind was still cold. But this time, he wasn't dragging the weight of his past behind him. He was walking with space in his soul, with stillness in his mind. That day, he didn't learn how to be stronger. He learned how to be lighter. And sometimes, that is the greater lesson. The mirror that never reflected. In a distant monastery nestled against the silent cliffs of the east, there lived a monk named Renji, known for his discipline, hard work, and unwavering commitment. Every morning before dawn, he was the first to rise. He cleaned the meditation hall, served the elders, studied the old scrolls, and meditated with an intensity few could match. Yet despite his devotion, something inside him remained unsettled. He watched as other monks were praised for their wisdom, for their kindness, for their progress. Yet he, despite doing everything right, remained unseen. No compliments, no affirmations, just silence. Over time, that silence began to grow louder than any sound. A quiet ache filled his heart, not for recognition, but for something deeper to feel that he mattered. One afternoon, during calligraphy practice, Renji approached the Zen Master. His voice was soft but heavy. "Master," he said, "for years I have trained, served, and followed every teaching. I don't seek glory, but does anyone see me? Am I not growing?" The master, who had been drawing a single black stroke across an empty page, didn't look up. Instead, he asked, "Do you know the story of the mirror that never reflected?" Renji blinked, confused. The master set down his brush and began to speak slowly, almost as if painting the story into the air. There once was a mirror that was hidden inside a cave, a perfect, flawless mirror. But because it faced a stone wall, it never saw light. It never reflected anything, not the sky, not a face, not the sun. And so, year after year, it believed it was broken, worthless, useless. One day, a traveler stumbled into the cave with a torch. For the first time, the mirror saw the flame, saw the traveler's face, saw itself reflecting something, anything. And in that moment, it wept. It had spent all its life doubting its worth, not realizing the only thing it lacked was the right direction. The words sank into Renji like rain into dry earth. For years, he had pointed his efforts outward toward approval, toward validation, toward someone finally saying, "You are enough." He had done everything except the one thing that matters most, turning the mirror inward, truly seeing himself. Not the image others gave him, but the truth that already lived within. He was not unseen because he lacked value. He was unseen because he never believed he could shine on his own. He had trained his body, disciplined his mind, even silenced his desires, but he had never truly loved himself. Not with presence, not with forgiveness, not with kindness. That night, for the first time in years, Renji didn't meditate to prove himself. He didn't study to impress. He sat alone by the koi pond, watching the moon ripple over the water. And for a long time, he said nothing. He just breathed. He just was. And in that stillness, he saw something he had been missing all along. Not in the reflection, but in the quiet gaze of someone who no longer needed to be seen by others because he had finally seen himself. The next morning, he swept the monastery paths like always, helped to prepare meals like always. But this time, his heart was not empty. It was calm, quiet, strong. He didn't need others to applaud him anymore. He didn't need to ask, "Am I growing?" Because he knew some roots grow in silence beneath the earth before they ever bloom. And those are often the roots that last the longest. The sound of one hand clapping. It was late evening in the monastery. The sky had turned a faded gold, and the light fell softly on the old wooden floors where the monks sat cross-legged in meditation. The Zen Master, now aged and silver-haired, had announced he would retire soon. A quiet sadness passed through the temple like a wind through reeds. Among the monks sat a young novice Soma, who had arrived only a few months ago. He was earnest but troubled, always caught in thought, always seeking answers. That night, after meditation, Soma approached the master with hesitation in his voice. "Master," he said, "before you leave, I want to understand one thing. I've heard it whispered among the monks. What is the sound of one hand clapping? They say it is a great koan, a mystery. Please tell me what it means." The master didn't reply immediately. He gazed out the window at the falling dusk, then walked slowly to the candlelit shrine at the front of the hall. He knelt not to pray, but to place a single flower there, a white lotus blooming wide. Then he looked back at Soma, eyes soft, and said, "Come with me." They walked in silence down the winding trail that led to the cliff's edge. Below them, the valley stretched like a sleeping giant. The moon had risen. The world was quiet. The master sat down on a stone, motioned for Soma to do the same, and asked, "Tell me, when you clap both hands, what do you hear?" Soma clapped. "A sound," he said. The master nodded. "And what is that sound made of?" The boy hesitated. "Contact, friction, two forces meeting." "Exactly," said the master. "Two hands, two ideas, two egos, always trying to meet, to collide, to prove something. That is how the world lives, always clapping, always noise." Then the master held up one hand, just one, and moved it slowly through the air. No sound. "This," he whispered, "is the sound of one hand clapping." Soma stared in confusion. "But there is no sound." "Correct," said the master. "And yet that is the answer." The boy's face tensed. "But how can silence be the answer?" The master looked at him, long and deep, because silence is not absence. It is presence without conflict. One hand does not need to prove itself. It does not need the other to define its value. It does not perform. It just exists. He leaned in closer. Most people live their whole lives clapping, seeking reaction, validation, comparison. They define themselves by how loud their lives are. Applause, attention, recognition. But the sound of one hand clapping is the life lived without needing to be heard. It is peace that does not beg to be noticed. It is action without ego. It is love without attachment, effort without striving. That Soma is true Zen. Soma's heart slowed as he sat beside the master. For the first time, he began to understand what the master had always embodied. A man who had nothing to prove, nothing to gain, nothing to defend. A man who smiled not because life was perfect, but because he was no longer trying to win at it. That night, Soma didn't sleep. He sat under the moon for hours, hand open, not clapping, just feeling the air. And for the first time in his life, he heard it, the sound of nothing and the peace that lives there. Years later, long after the master had passed, visitors would come to the monastery and ask Soma, now a teacher himself, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" And he would simply smile and say nothing, because some truths can only be understood in silence. If this final story touched your soul, let that silence guide your next step. Like the video, not as a habit, but as a quiet nod to yourself. Comment below, what did you hear in the sound of one hand clapping? And subscribe, not just for more stories, but for reminders that the deepest truths in life don't shout, they whisper.